can I take a moment just to mark the passing of John Knott? I know I opened yesterday's show with a bit of a riddle. What were the three words that we opened with yesterday? Mateless, Marks and Dixville. Careful, Keith. I've got a riddle well, it's not a riddle this morning, but do you know why John Knott, the former Defence Secretary who has just passed away, very much a bastion of a form of conservatism that younger listeners have never experienced in their lives. Do you know why he is strangely relevant to the political landscape in America? It only just occurred to me, so, I always find myself worrying when these thoughts pop into my head before the news, just as the news bulletin comes to an end, that I'm about to embarrass myself live on air. I think that's probably why you tune in, isn't it? In the hope that I do. But John Knott is part of the story of Rupert Murdoch's corruption of the body politic on both sides of the Atlantic. It was in 1981 that Rupert Murdoch met with Margaret Thatcher at Chequers. They had a Sunday lunch together at Chequers. She was trailing in the polls. The country was in a recession. And she really needed a cheerleader. The British media back in 1981 was very different from what the British media is like today. The British media today is a place where you can listen to people wearing poppies claiming that we should respect the system that delivers an overtly fascistic leader to the top of the political tree in America. The poppy, of course, is probably the most powerful symbol that British people have of the promise never to allow history to repeat itself, never to allow European attitudes to events in 1930s Germany to be repeated. Sadly, they are, looking at much of the British media today, being repeated in British attitudes to the political landscape in America. But John Knott went to Chequers and wanted help in expanding his empire. His empire was quite small at the time. He had the Sun, which was nothing like the monster it would become, but he needed the Times and he needed the Sunday Times in order to really buy respectability and consolidate his position. And Margaret Thatcher came back from Chequers. They denied that this meeting had ever taken place at all for 30 years. Do you know how it came out that this meeting had actually taken place? I think it was at Leveson. It was at one of the public inquiries where I think Bernard Ingham, Thatcher's former press secretary, was giving evidence. Ingham, a man who went to his grave, still accusing Liverpool fans of having caused the Hillsborough tragedy. And he was asked whether it had taken place. Well, Margaret Thatcher at some... Anyway, someone claimed they couldn't... No, it was Murdoch. It was Murdoch at Leveson. The humblest day of my life. It was Murdoch at Leveson saying he had no idea whether he had no memory of. So they denied that the meeting had taken place for 30 years. Murdoch claimed throughout that period that he'd had no memory of it. And then because of the clock that allows things to be released, the number of years pass, and then official documents can be put into the public space. The QC that was interrogating Murdoch at, I think, Leveson, one of the public inquiries, said, well, this might jog your memory. Here is the thank you letter that you sent to Margaret Thatcher after that meeting at Chequers in 1981 that you have denied ever since. So Thatcher then comes back from Chequers, mindful that her business secretary, John Knott, was a notoriously tough cookie. He was a man for whom the letter of the law and the detail of the law was paramount. It's the 30-year rule. There you go. It's not a coincidence, is it? 31 years of denying it. And then, of course, as a consequence of the 30-year rule, the document gets released. So John Knott was business secretary, which means John Knott would have the final say on whether or not Rupert Murdoch was allowed to buy the Times and the Sunday Times after Murdoch had put together a claim, fiercely disputed by the then editor of the Sunday Times, a claim that because they were hemorrhaging money, then the normal rules of monopoly and mergers shouldn't apply. In other words, the rules in place to stop any individual from becoming too powerful in the panoply of the UK media should not apply to Rupert Murdoch's attempt to buy the Times and the Sunday Times because they were losing money. Harry Evans, who was the editor of the Sunday Times at the time, was adamant and provided evidence to suggest that the Sunday Times was not losing money at all. So Thatcher comes back from that meeting and calls John Nott to Downing Street. John Nott, an ally, a widely respected business secretary. And when John Nott left Downing Street, he was not business secretary anymore. He was defence secretary, which is why in Thomas's bulletin there, it reminded us that John Nott was defence secretary during the Falklands conflict. Twice he offered his resignation. Again, evidence of a form of integrity, a calibre of conservative politician that we haven't seen in this country now for generations. John Nott was an example. Flawed, imperfect. I get loads of messages now telling me all sorts of things about him that will make your hair fall out. But that is how politicians used to behave. Lord Carrington's resignation was accepted, I think, in the immediate aftermath of the invasion. So John Nott leaves Downing Street and he's not business secretary anymore. He is defence secretary. And he was replaced by, and this is where I was hoping that my brain would kick in, John Biffin. There you go. It did kick in. Crikey, it happened. He was replaced by John Biffin, widely regarded as a much softer touch. And lo and behold, John Biffin waved through Rupert Murdoch's rationale for being able to sidestep monopolies and mergers laws and buy the Times and the Sunday Times. So we mark the passing of John Nott by remembering Rupert Murdoch's visit to Chequers, denied for 30 years, revealed by documentation released as a consequence of the 30-year rule. We note that the swapping out of John Nott, the late John Nott, for John Biffin enabled Rupert Murdoch to essentially sidestep rules put in place to stop any one individual assuming too much power over the body politic in the United Kingdom. And we reflect that over the course of the next 50 years, give or take, he would undertake a very similar project in America, albeit one that involved him having to take out American citizenship and exercise precisely the sort of influence over the body politic in America that our monopoly and mergers laws in this country were once, before he blew them up, like he has blown up so much, were once designed to prevent. So it is possible, I would say probable, that little vignette of British politics explains, and historians of the future will attest to be, the part of the process by which Donald Trump could become president of America twice. Because without Fox News, Donald Trump would have been nothing the first time around. And then, of course, even after Fox News lost $800 million for promoting his lies about the election that he lost, that slow creep back to support for him is part of how he did it this time. So there it is. I know that's a little bit weird. That's how my brain works. I love that kind of, what would you call it? Almost the cryptology of politics. But it is amazing how many stories lead back to the same space, lead back to the same spot. The corruption of the body politic by people like Rupert Murdoch, the legacy of Margaret Thatcher, the mainstreaming of, at best, dishonesty, at worst, blatant lies. And here we are today. But obviously that's not what we're talking about on the programme. We're talking about Kidderminster Harriers and their astonishing victory at Curzon Ashton last night. What did the Democrats get wrong? What did the Democrats do wrong? Here's a thought. If you were looking at your ballot paper in America earlier this week and you were genuinely, and I don't think it's fair to typify these people as selfish or as self-obsessed or as greedy. We talked yesterday about the ability to either freeze out, ignore, or even perhaps not know about the extent of Donald Trump's personal depravity and the descriptions of Donald Trump from his, Byzantine's the word I was looking for, Jamie, these Byzantine details of political history. We talked about that yesterday and focused instead on the question of what people did vote for. And it's pretty obvious, isn't it? People voted in America for the man they thought would improve their life. And most obviously, he would improve their life by making their dollar go further in shops, in car dealerships, in grocery stores, and also by deporting illegal immigrants who they believe, rightly or wrongly, are a drain upon their dollar. That part of the reason why their dollar does not go as far as they want is because of all the illegal immigrants, rightly or wrongly, doesn't actually matter for the purposes of this conversation. So that was the offer, right? That is what you are contemplating as you stand in the ballot box. And that, of course, makes it irrelevant whether you're Hispanic or whether you're a WASP, whether you have Scottish heritage, German heritage, or Mexican heritage, particularly if you're second or third generation. And because, again, rightly or wrongly, because the American dream teaches a form of equality that's very different from what we hold dear in this country. The American dream, it tells you, I am as American as people who came over on the Mayflower. So to cast a vote, despite what many of us would see as negatives, is not as shocking as it should be. I am voting for improvements to my life. All right? That is what I am voting for. And Donald Trump has promised me improvements to my life. He has promised me that inflation will come down. He has promised me that he will get rid of all these people I believe are a drain, not on the economy as such, as a big macro entity, but as a drain upon my personal, too much of my money, where if it's going on taxes, is going on things that it shouldn't be going on. Donald Trump has promised to make me better off, to make me financially healthier. That's the promise. What was Kamala Harris's promise? So it's kind of a trick question, that. What was Kamala Harris's promise? You stood in that ballot box. You licked your pencil. You prepared to put your cross in the box. What was the promise you were hoping she would keep? This is a thought that came into my head, and we may play the clip again, when we were listening to that former Bush advisor talking about risk, talking about how a lot of these people would never countenance putting Donald Trump in charge of their child's school. But that's all about stakes, isn't it? It's all about what's at stake. If you're putting someone in charge of your child's school with a history of personal depravity that would make Genghis Khan blush, then you're risking something very personal. You put him in charge of the whole country, what's the worst that can happen? All right, he's going to deport some people. He's not going to deport me. He's going to deploy the army to break up protests about Palestine. But I'm not on any protests about Palestine. Why should I care about that? So what have I got to lose by voting for the man who's going to improve my life? And what did Kamala Harris promise those people? Listen, I followed it quite closely, perhaps not as closely as I could have done, but I don't think she promised them anything, which makes the scale of the victory a heck of a lot easier to understand. So that is your starter for 10, or your starter at 10. You may think it's an unfair question, but you know how this program works. All opinions welcome. Come one, come all. What did they do wrong? What did Kamala Harris, and perhaps more pertinently, the Democrat machine, the Democrat Party, how did they mess it up so badly? How did they get everything so wrong? And listen, we'll take the big stuff, which might be the broad, great historical sweep of post-war America, and we'll take the little stuff, which might be, I don't know, why did she keep bringing out some of the richest people in the country to tell some of the poorest people in the country why they should vote for her? It might have been, I don't want to put too many ideas in your head, but remember, your job is to explain your suggestions, not just to provide them. It might be that the smug presumption that I'm not Donald Trump, that'll be enough to get me over the line. But they should have learned in 2016 that wasn't enough. They should have learned in 2020 that it was barely enough. So how did the Democrats get it so wrong? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How did they get it so wrong? And from that, perhaps, we can wonder what they might need to do differently if they want to stop this bizarre march backwards on issues that many of us spent much of our lives thinking were missions accomplished, whether you're talking about abortion rights or basic equalities, common decency, rapists being bad, all of the things that you thought were over as conversations are not. So what did they get so wrong? How did they mess it up so completely? If indeed you think they did.